Hello and welcome to episode 17 of Courtside. I am your host, Andrew Cohen. Courtside is a podcast dedicated to all things sports. In today's episode, I will go over the starting quarterback situation for every AFC team in the first of a two-part series. So sit back, relax, and take a seat. Courtside. So basically, over the next two episodes of the Courtside podcast, this one, as well as the next one, episode 18, I'm going to be going over the starting quarterback, or the quarterback situation for every NFL team. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide if I think it's a good situation or a bad situation. Simple. And I wanted to do this because I think it's interesting. I wanted to kind of take a look at the state of the NFL quarterback, the quarterback situation for every NFL team. And here's my methodology for how I'm going to decide if I like a team's current quarterback situation or if I don't like the team's current quarterback situation. So, for me to like a quarterback situation, a team either has to have the franchise quarterback now or have drafted / signed one of the future, or has a guy currently that can play and gives them time to draft or sign the next guy. And I'm going to start off with the AFC East. We'll start with the Patriots, who have Tom Brady currently, as well as Brian Hoyer backing him up, and Danny Etling, 7th round pick on the practice squad. So, obviously, you have Tom Brady, and to me, assuming he doesn't retire for a few years, they have the franchise quarterback for now. He's actually having a pretty similar year statistically to last year, which he won the MVP, but the team has fewer wins, has had a couple games. They're either scoring over 30 or 10 or fewer. It's, they're either up or they're down. And, again, statistically, he's pretty similar, but, I've watched every Patriots game this year, and there are times where he's not standing in the pocket as long as he has in the past. It looks like he's trying to avoid taking big hits. That's just what I've observed. But again, overall, as long as he doesn't retire for a few years, they have a franchise guy at quarterback, and they're also going to have time to draft the next franchise quarterback, or who they think will be the next franchise quarterback in the next couple of drafts. All right, moving on to the Buffalo Bills. They have Josh Allen, and he's been a pleasant surprise, I would say. He's 4-5 as the starter. He's beaten the Vikings and Titans, which those are two teams at the beginning of the year, at least with the Vikings, we thought they were going to be really, really good. And they came out week 3 and lost to the Bills, which was a huge shock. The Titans are fighting for the playoffs, so those are two really good wins. They also beat the Jags and Lions. So I'm also looking at stats. 6 touchdowns to 9 picks. A 52.2 completion percentage really isn't great. But I looked at the leading receivers for the Bills, and this is in receptions. Zay Jones, a former second-round pick. Kelvin Benjamin, who they just released a couple weeks ago. Charles Clay, the tight end. Robert Foster. Isaiah McKenzie. Jason Kroom. And a bunch of other guys you probably haven't heard of unless you're a Bills fan or a huge follower of the NFL like me. Now, what's been really impressive for Josh Allen has been rushing. 75 rushes for 506 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. That's what's been shocking to me. Now, I didn't really know much about Josh Allen coming out of college, but this is pretty impressive stuff running the football. Now, how long does it last? How much do the Bills want their quarterback doing that? I have no idea. But I think, to me, if he can get some playmakers around him, I think he could be a pretty solid quarterback for the Bills. And the Bills historically have been a team that have kind of relied on their defense a little bit more. They have a defensive head coach in Sean McDermott. So overall, I really like the quarterback situation for the Bills. Like, the team's just not talented whatsoever. Yet they're 5-9, 4 of those wins coming with Josh Allen starting. So he's been pretty impressive, considering just the overall talent of that roster. Next up, another rookie quarterback for the Jets. We have Sam Darnold. So he also has 4 wins. He's 4-7 as a starter. But if you saw the game against the Texans this past Saturday, he looked really, really good. That was definitely the best game I've seen from him all season long. And Similarly to Josh Allen, not much talent around him on the outside. You have Robbie Anderson. I think Robbie Anderson's pretty good. He was fine last year. He's not a number one receiver. Quincy Enunwa was actually hurt for that game against Houston, which made things a lot more impressive. And he's not a number one guy. And then Jermaine Kearse, who had actually, I saw the stats from last year. He actually had his best statistical season last year. But again, he's not a number one guy. He's not even really a number two guy. So they don't have an elite playmaker on the outside. And they have a beat-up offensive line. They have an inconsistent defense. A coach that has 2 games remaining before he'll probably be fired. But he's won 4 games. He's looked okay. 14 touchdowns to 15 picks. It's not great. 15 picks, by the way. He leads the league in interceptions. And he missed 3 weeks with a sprained foot. So in fewer games than most other quarterbacks, he has more picks, which isn't great. Only a 57% completion percentage. But what I like about Sam Darnold is he's taking chances. He's throwing the ball down the field. He's not afraid to try to make a play. Whereas I think other quarterbacks, specifically some of these rookie quarterbacks, not necessarily this year, but in past years as well, they've seemed afraid to take chances. And this is what I like about Sam Darnold. Doesn't have any playmakers on the outside, so that hurts him a lot. But overall, I just think if he can get some help, similar to Josh Allen, but I think even to a greater extent, if he can get some help, he can be a franchise quarterback. So far, I like the Patriots, Bills, and Jets quarterback situations. The Dolphins, though, with Ryan Tannehill and Brock Osweiler, Tannehill's okay. Not that he's a bad quarterback. He's okay. He's average. But, he doesn't pop off the page. He doesn't pop off the screen when you're watching him. The Dolphins have only made it to the playoffs once since he's taken over as the starter. 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And the year they made the playoffs, he actually got injured and didn't even play the last 2 or 3 games of the regular season, didn't play in the playoff game, which they lost, by the way. And you have the backup in Brock Osweiler. He's really nothing special. So, Tannehill's not the franchise guy. Neither is Osweiler, for that matter. They don't currently have a guy in-house that can be the franchise guy, franchise quarterback of the future. And also, Tannehill's contract is really bad. So, the next 2 years, starting in 2019, he'll get paid $20 million per year for 2 years. So, he's not even going to be a cheap starting quarterback, but he's going to get paid like a franchise quarterback, and he's not. To me, Miami needs... if I were Miami, I would draft a quarterback. They need to draft a quarterback. Get a young quarterback that can work with Adam Gase, the newish head coach. Build him up. But right now, I do not like the quarterback situation for the Miami Dolphins. So now I'm going to move on to the AFC North, and I'll start with an easy one, the Pittsburgh Steelers. You have Big Ben, former fourth rounder Josh Dobbs, as well as a third rounder in Mason Rudolph. As long as Ben Roethlisberger is there, Pittsburgh's going to be fine at quarterback. They're going to be set. And when he leaves or retires, he'll probably retire. They actually have a nice quarterback competition between 2 guys that I personally think can both play a little bit. But at the very least, I think one of the 2 guys can take over, Rudolph or Dobbs. I think one of them can take over the starting job. They have Juju Smith-Schuster, who's young. They drafted James Washington. Antonio Brown will still be there for a few years. James Conner, nice young running back. So I think whoever comes in will be able to pick up right where Big Ben leaves off. Hopefully grow and develop for them. But yeah, definitely really like the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback situation. Moving on, the Cleveland Browns, Baker Mayfield. The biggest complaint, or the biggest problem I have with Baker Mayfield to this point in his career is his inconsistency on a week-to-week basis. I mean, there's some weeks where he looks like he's the next great NFL franchise quarterback, and there are others where it looks like the Browns made a horrible mistake with the number 1 pick. But he is a rookie quarterback, keep in mind. we should be expecting this inconsistency. He has a 64% completion percentage, over 3,000 yards in only 11.5 games, 21 touchdowns to 11 picks. The numbers are really good. And to me, they don't lie. I like Baker Mayfield in the long run for the Browns. Now, it is the Browns. We do have to keep that in mind. They haven't been good in a while. But I do like Baker Mayfield, and I like the quarterback situation for the Cleveland Browns. And the other thing, too, if Baker Mayfield were to get hurt, now I don't know how long Tyrod Taylor will be there for, but they have a solid backup that can probably string together some wins if need be. I like the quarterback situation for the Browns. Now let's move on to the Bengals. Andy Dalton, Jeff Driscoll, they're okay. So I think they're in a similar spot to the Dolphins, the Bengals are. When it comes to the quarterback spot, they have an average at best quarterback, and they have no future guy on the roster. Now listen, Dalton's fine in the regular season. He's even made the Pro Bowl a couple times, but he's just so bad in the playoffs. So bad. The Bengals made the playoffs with Dalton as the starter in 2011, 12, 13, and 14. Haven't made it back with Dalton as the starter, by the way. Just saying. And by the way, they lost all 4 times. And they weren't even close for the most part. They lost 31-10, 19-13, 27-10, and 26-10. The offense, led by Andy Dalton, put up 10 points 3 times and 13 points the other time. That is atrocious. They are coming out there, and they smelled worse than a garbage dump. They were terrible. He's also getting paid $14 million this year, $16 million next year, and $17.5 million the year after that. So, as solid as Andy Dalton is, and they do have talent, by the way. They have Joe Mixon, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, Tyler Eifert. They have talent. But to me, they need to draft a guy for the future or sign a guy for the future before I can say they have a good quarterback situation. I do not put my stamp of approval on the Bengals quarterback situation currently. And finally, in the AFC North, we have the Ravens with Lamar Jackson, with Joe Flacco backing him up, and Robert Griffin III is the third guy. And I love Lamar Jackson. I really, really like Lamar Jackson. He's a talented runner, doesn't make a ton of mistakes throwing the ball. He's 4-1 as the starter for Baltimore. And his only loss came to Kansas City, in Kansas City, which is a tough game to win for any quarterback. The only guy to do it this year is Phillip Rivers, elite quarterback. But the Ravens game in Kansas City went into overtime, and the Ravens were in the lead for a decent part of the game. And honestly, when that game ended, it felt like the Ravens won the game. Even though that wasn't reflected on the scoreboard, it felt like the Ravens did way more to win that game than the Chiefs. And that is really impressive for a young quarterback. It's really impressive for a quarterback in general to go into Kansas City and compete with Patrick Mahomes in that high-flying offense and the fan base there. But really impressive for a young quarterback. And the biggest thing for me really is just the juice, the energy that he's added to that team. The Ravens started the season with Joe Flacco under center, and before Flacco's injury, they were 4-5, had lost 3 straight, and had been, at least in my opinion, one of the most boring teams to watch week in and week out. But now with Lamar Jackson, the team plays with more energy. As I mentioned earlier, they're 4-1 with him, and they control their own destiny to end the year with a playoff spot. If the Patriots did what they were supposed to do and beat the Steelers, the Ravens would be leading the AFC North right now. And a couple weeks ago when I thought the Ravens could win the AFC North, and I really wanted to say they could, I just couldn't. But it's legitimately a possibility at this point. So I really like this quarterback situation in Baltimore. And I'll admit, Lamar isn't the best when it comes to throwing the ball. I mean, I don't think he's had over 200 yards passing yet in a game. But part of that, I think, is the talent on the outside. They really don't have much. So again, if he can get some legit talent, and this is kind of a common theme with a lot of these rookie quarterbacks, but if he can get some legit talent on the outside, he's going to be very, 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 just very dangerous. So watch out. Moving on to the AFC South, we have the Houston Texans with Deshaun Watson under center, and he is really good. Oh yeah, is he a stud? Completes about 68% of his passes, 24 touchdowns to 9 picks, only 2 interceptions since week 6, can make plays outside of the pocket, make plays with his legs, running the ball. And if he didn't have the most sacks in the league, I think he has 52 sacks or something absurd like that. If he didn't have the most sacks in the league, he would be so much more effective. I think he would be in the conversation for maybe a top 5 quarterback. And his team would be much, much better. But overall, the Texans are set for years to come with Deshaun Watson. The only concern, I guess, would be the injury he had the torn ACL last year. If he were to re-aggravate something in that knee, he would lose a lot of mobility. But I don't see how you could not like the situation for the Houston Texans. Then we have the Colts with Andrew Luck, who missed an entire year with a terrible shoulder injury. Comes back, and since week 4, has been one of the most dominant quarterbacks, if not the most dominant quarterback, in the league. You could make the argument that he's been the best quarterback in the NFL this year. I would not argue with you. If he plays well the last 2 weeks of the year, which he's going to have to do for his team to make the playoffs anyways, he could tie or beat his career high in touchdown passes. Currently, his career high for touchdown passes in a single season is 40. He will also finish with the best completion percentage of his career, around 67-68%, and of course lead his team without really a lot of talent to the playoffs. I mean, if you look at the Indianapolis roster, there is very little talent outside of a couple guys, right? You have Luck, T.Y. Hilton, you have, I guess, Marlon Mack, you could put on that list. Eric Ebron's been really good. But at the beginning of the year, when I looked at this team, I just didn't trust it. And Andrew Luck and Frank Reich, they've gotten the most talent out of the players outside of Andrew Luck. They've gotten a ton of talent out of these guys. They've gotten them to buy into the system, to the team. Andrew Luck and that quarterback situation, really good for many, many years to come. Then we have the Jaguars. Yeah, this is the dumpster fire of quarterback situations. Blake Bortles and Cody Kessler. One guy is, he's the most overpaid quarterback in the league, and he was so obviously not worth the contract. Again, there's so many players like this in sports. When a team signs a guy or re-signs a guy, gives him a contract extension for a ton of money, and everybody knows he's not deserving of it. And it's much worse when they give it to him based off like 1 or 2 games in the playoffs. Because he played so well against New England in the playoffs last year, which is a game they lost, by the way. They had to give him this huge contract, 3 years, $54 million, $18 million a year. And he sucks. He's, for lack of a better word, he's terrible. Tom Coughlin made a terrible decision signing him to that type of contract. And Cody Kessler obviously isn't good. Now, I would give Bortles the benefit of the doubt in the sense that they didn't really have Leonard Fournette for, 8, 9, 10 weeks in the middle of the year. And last year he was a key part of that formula. But at a certain point, you have to be expected to make plays as a franchise quarterback. Blake Bortles is not that. They need to get a good young quarterback as soon as possible. I hate this quarterback situation with a passion. And finally, there's the Titans. It was a quick transition. But finally, there's the Titans. I'm really, really torn on this one. But I'm going to say they do have a good quarterback situation with Marcus Mariota. Mariota is completing 68.5% of his passes, which is like 6.5% up from last year. He's already set a career high for rushing yards with 350. But here's the problem. In the games I've seen Mariota play in this year, I've seen a guy that doesn't take shots downfield. a guy that would rather dump it off for 5 yards every time than risk turning the ball over, trying to throw the ball 30 plus yards for a big play. And personally, if I were to be a coach or a GM of an NFL team, I would not want a game-managing quarterback to be my starter. But here are the reasons why I think this is a good situation for the Titans. First of all, Mariota's had a bunch of different offensive coordinators in just 4 years in the league. So almost every year he's had to adjust to a new system, which is really hard as a young quarterback. It's one thing when you're a veteran, you've been in the league for a decade, you're used to getting used to new systems all the time, especially if you're a backup. So that's the first thing. Second of all, he had an elbow injury for a while this season that limited his ability to grip and throw a football. So there were a few weeks, because Blaine Gabbert, their other quarterback, got hurt. And so there was a certain point in time where Marcus Mariota played and could not throw a football any better than a guy they picked up off the street. So there's that. And then third, and I'm not sure how I feel about this statement, but the Titans don't have a ton of talent on the outside besides maybe Corey Davis, who's been underwhelming, by the way. They lost Delaney Walker in like week 1 for the entire year. So, and I keep saying this, but if they got one other receiver that could take because there's a lot of attention being put on Corey Davis because he's by far the most talented receiver they have. If they could just get a second guy that's reliable and good, I think Mariota could actually be really, really solid. I mean, his second year in the league, he actually had a really good year. I don't have the stats up right here in front of me, but I remember the stats were really good. And this year he's having he's having his second best season probably this year, but I do believe in Mariota going forward. He's young, appears to be fairly coachable. So overall, I do like this quarterback situation for the Tennessee Titans. And finally, I'm going to move on to the AFC West. And we have the Chiefs first up. And obviously, having Patrick Mahomes is an amazing situation. You could argue Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL right now. In his first year as a starter, mind you. You could argue that he's the best quarterback in the NFL, and I would respect your argument. The guy has passed for over 4,500 yards, has 45 touchdowns, just 11 interceptions, and has completed 67% of his passes. And he makes big play after big play after big play, and he's exciting to watch, and he hasn't necessarily shown the ability to come up huge late in big games to this point in his career at least. But he has a ton of room to grow, and he is so young. I don't even think he's 20. I think he's probably, 22, 23, so he has a long, great future ahead of him. The Los Angeles Chargers, moving on here, we have Phillip Rivers, and as long as he's there, it's a good quarterback situation. But he is 37 years old. Time is definitely running out for him, and I think the Chargers need to draft a quarterback relatively soon. But since they have the franchise quarterback right now, according to my parameters, I do like the situation here. Rivers is arguably having the best season of his entire 13-year career as a starting quarterback in the NFL. He could end up setting career highs in completion percentage, touchdowns, least interceptions thrown, and he's finally going to make the playoffs for the first time in a few years because he finally has some decent talent around him. I like this quarterback situation. Then there's the Oakland, soon to be Las Vegas, most likely, Raiders with Derek Carr. And you may disagree with me on this one, but I actually really like Derek Carr. If you look at his numbers, you would see that he's actually in the midst of his second best statistical career of his career. And he's probably going to set a career high in passing yards and in completion percentage. And by the way, he only has 8 interceptions on the year. When I saw that, I was shocked. because it feels like he's making a lot of mistakes. He's actually not making a ton of mistakes. And he still has a good amount of passing yards. Now, the talent on the outside isn't there, which is maybe what makes this even more impressive. So I do like Derek Carr. I think he's a talented guy. Here's where it starts to become problematic for me with as far as the overall quarterback situation for the Raiders. He's signed until 2022 at about $19 million per year. And the Raiders have a very untalented roster. So by paying Derek Carr all this money, they don't have as much money to spend elsewhere to improve the overall talent level of the entire roster. And they also have, I'm not sure if you knew this, they have a huge coaching problem. And as long as John Gruden is there, I can't like the quarterback situation because Carr and Gruden have a seemingly very toxic relationship. And while I like Derek Carr, and I think he can be the franchise guy, I don't like him with the Raiders. I don't like that situation with those two sides. With the Raiders, John Gruden, and Derek Carr, I don't think they match. That's why I do not like the quarterback situation for the Raiders. And finally, we have the Denver Broncos. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Case Keenum's not a great quarterback. He's not a good quarterback. Last year with the Vikings, he caught lightning in a bottle and was in just about the most perfect situation you could imagine in Minnesota. They had an amazing defense, a solid running game, a good O-line, elite playmakers on the outside, really good coaching. His job was extremely easy. Do you know how many quarterbacks would have loved to have had his job last year? So then he comes to Denver, and you could take everything that Minnesota had last year is worse in Denver. Worse coaching, worse offensive line, very few playmakers, especially now that they've traded Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders towards Achilles. They have a decent running game, I'll give them that. Defensively, they're okay. But the quarterback situation, they need a good quarterback, and he's just not that. Now, his contract is up after next year, which is okay. I guess that's better than having him be under contract for a few more years. But here's kind of the biggest problem. The Broncos have drafted a few quarterbacks. In recent years, they drafted Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, Chad Kelly. But those guys are dropping like flies. The guys they draft have not panned out. So John Elway badly needs to hit on a quarterback in whether it's this draft or next year's draft, or potentially, sign a guy, maybe Derek Carr, who knows, but sign a guy or draft a guy in the next couple years. I give them 2 years at most, but right now, no chance that I like this quarterback situation. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this edition of Courtside. Join me tomorrow, where I'll go over the quarterback situations in the NFC. And remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you may be listening, and follow the podcast on Twitter. Link will be in the description. Signing off, this is Andrew Cohn. I will see you next time.